Welcome to HUD's Housing Choice Voucher Overviews. This video will discuss the process of submitting PBV program cap reviews to HUD. When a PHA decides to implement a PBV program, there are several steps they must take to notify HUD. The first step is to ensure that plans for your PBV program are included in your PHA plan and administrative plan. Then you will need to notify HUD and provide data that shows how your PHA will meet PBV program caps. There are two ways to notify HUD. One way is to send an email with documentation written in narrative form. The other option for notifying HUD is to complete a PBV program cap calculation worksheet and submit that worksheet to HUD. The worksheet is a great tool for keeping track of your own portfolio. Both methods for submitting this data should be emailed to pbvsubmission@hud.gov. These reports must be submitted to HUD at least 14 days prior to making a selection or advertising an RFP for PBV programs. However, if the PHA has certain exceptions, you don't necessarily need to wait for HUD to respond after those 14 days are up before making a selection or publishing an RFP. It is important to note that program cap review is not project specific. HUD is looking at what kind of commitment your PHA wants to make out of the program as a whole to ensure that your program maintains choice and mobility for families. If, for example, you have 1,000 HCV units and you want to develop 200 units of PBV at some point over the next 2 years, you can ask for a program cap review specifically for those 200 units. You do not need to wait until each specific project comes into the pipeline to go through this process. Again, HUD's primary goal is to ensure that your program maintains choice and mobility for families. HUD also wants to make sure that they understand any impacts on your funding, since PBV units can have different per-unit cost over time than other types of units. If you choose to submit PBV program cap reviews via a narrative email, there are 5 required data points that must be included in the email. First, you must report your total number of authorized ACC units. HUD typically has a good idea of that number, but it's still important to report in order to account for any changes in RAD conversions that may have increased your amount of ACC units but are not yet caught up in HUD's reporting. Mainstream awards are included in the ACC total for the purpose of calculating the program cap. You also must report the total number of PBV units that are excluded from the program limitation. That generally includes public housing conversions and other types of units that were previously federally assisted. Next, you must include the number of units that you currently have under contract, which fit into the 10% exception category group. These are typically units that are designed specifically for homelessness, veterans, units with supportive services, or units located in a census tract with poverty rate of 20%. And fourth, you must include the number of units that are currently committed to PBV, including all forms of commitment under HAP and AHAP, which should also be reported in VMS. That also includes anything that's in the pipeline, where you've provided a notice of selection, but you may not have a HAP on those units yet. Last, you must include the number of new units to which the PHA is proposing to project base through an RFP or selection. When HUD receives a PHA's email with all of the data points listed on the previous slide, they input that data into a spreadsheet that looks like this. In this example, the PHA has 693 total ACC units, which matches HUD's records. They have no units that are excluded or exempt. This is their first submission. Notice that this PHA is requesting to meet the 20% cap from the beginning. They are able to commit up to 138 of the HCV units toward PBV at whatever point in the future they are able. If, in the future, they decide to recategorize some of those 138 units as special purpose units, For example, if they were to dedicate those units specifically for veterans, then they would be able to increase their cap later to add more PBV units. The other method for submitting this data to HUD is by using the Program Cap Calculation Worksheet. It can be found on HUD's Project-Based Voucher page at this link, where you will find additional important resources related to the PBV program. This worksheet is an alternate and more efficient method for submitting PBV program cap reviews to HUD. The next few slides will walk through how to complete each step of the worksheet. The first step in filling out the worksheet is to enter the number of ACC units on line 17. That information can be found easily in PIC by selecting Housing Agency in the Housing Inventory section. Then select the Housing Authority tab, click on Inventory to view the Inventory detail, where you will see your PHA's number of ACC units. Enter that number, which includes any mainstream units, into line 17 of the worksheet. Next, you will need to document all the units that qualify as excluded. This includes units that previously received these other types of funding listed, such as Public Housing, Section 8, PBRA, 202, 811, and more. You will need to document this for both proposed and HUD-approved units. Any units reported in the HUD-approved column have been included in a previous notification, meaning your PHA has previously reported them to HUD. In this example, the Sample Housing Authority had 8 units that were previously designated as Section 811. They are proposing to convert 4 units that were previously public housing. This Sample Housing Authority also has an award for VASH PBV as noted in line 34. The information entered in steps 2 and 3 will automatically adjust data points in the summary table toward the top of the worksheet. Notice that the data entered on lines 20 through 35 serves to adjust the baseline, shown in line 10, revised baseline. There were originally 100 units. The worksheet automatically subtracted the 20 units reported in steps 2 and 3 to reduce the baseline to 80 units. This makes the 20% program cap 16 units with an additional potential 8 units for the 10% increase for special categories. Step 4 is where your housing authority will report on PBV units under the 10% program cap, including both proposed and previously approved units. In this example, the Sample Housing Authority previously submitted to Project-Based 5 units in a project to provide supportive housing to elderly persons. They are also proposing to Project-Base 3 of its regular VASH vouchers in the future. Once we complete Step 4, we can see those changes reflected in the summary table. The worksheet will automatically calculate that the 8 PBV units, approved and proposed, that were entered for Step 4 equal the maximum number of units that can be project-based under the 10% program cap. This is a helpful tool to ensure you do not go over the 10% cap. In Step 5, you will report the number of regular HCV PBV units. This step is sometimes confused for a sum total of the entire worksheet. The intended use of this section is to report on any units that don't fit into another category that was reported on above. In this example, the Sample Housing Authority previously submitted to Project-Based 10 units and are not proposing any more. The data entered for Step 5 will be reflected in the summary table on line 11. As you can see in this example, the worksheet calculates that the 10 HUD-approved units equal 12.5% of units that can be project-based, which is below the 20% cap. This leaves an additional 7.5% still available. The green-filled squares indicate that this Sample Housing Authority meets requirements and will likely be approved by HUD in accordance with Notice 2017-21. This example shows what happens when a PHA exceeds the 10% program cap on exception units. The PHA is proposing to convert 9 units to PBV units specifically for veterans. On line 12 of the summary table, you will see that the worksheet calculates that these 9 units put the PHA over the 10% limit to 17.5%. HUD will reject this proposal for being over the 10% cap for special exception units. Example number 3 shows what happens when a PHA exceeds the 20% overall program cap. In this example, the PHA is proposing an additional 20 regular PBV units. In the summary table, you will see on line 11 that this put the PHA at 25% of the program cap, exceeding the 20% limit by 5%. HUD will reject this proposal for being over the 20% overall PBV cap. Again, this worksheet serves as an efficient tool and is a recommended method for tracking and submitting PBV program cap information to HUD. If your PHA prefers to submit the required information in a narrative email form, as described previously in this presentation, that is acceptable as well. HUD sees some common errors in PBV cap submissions. Common errors in a narrative submission include providing only the information about the proposed units rather than all units already committed. Another common error on narrative submissions is using the project cap exceptions rather than the program cap exceptions. For example, elderly projects have a 100% exception for the project. HUD often sees PHAs omit information that would inform HUD about unit eligibility for an exclusion or exception. Common errors on a worksheet submission include adding units in Step 2 on the Project-Based Rental Assistance row that were not actually former PBRA units. This language often confuses people. In both types of submissions, PHAs often omit mainstream units when calculating the total ACC. Make sure that mainstream units are included in the ACC you are reporting. Another common error in both submissions is incorrectly placing regular VASH vouchers that the PHA has project-based in the Excluded Units section. This exclusion should only be used for VASH awarded as PBV from HUD to the PHA in certain years. This video is only a brief explanation of submitting PBV program cap reviews to HUD. Check out HUD's PBV page for more information about the PBV program, including the latest updates on rules and requirements, a template for the program cap calculation worksheet, forms, and other helpful resources. This concludes HUD's presentation on how to submit project-based voucher program cap reviews. Please check out the full series of webinars to learn more about the basics of the Housing Choice Voucher Program.